Hamlet continues his confrontation with his mother by visiting another one of his and perhaps the play's obsessions, that is to say, the past, and how much better the past was, its commanding presence in his life, the shadow it throws over every thought he has. That past is embodied by his father. I say embodied because his father also comes to him without a body, that is to say, in the form of a ghost. And Hamlet uses the presence of the ghost in his head and his awareness of his father to shame his mother. So he shames his mother not only with that sense of the past, but also that sense of physicality, the very fleshy way in which his mother is sinning. We'll come to that in a moment. I'll say that though partly because if we're looking for a structure to an answer, if you were coming at this passage in particular, well, those are two preoccupations of Hamlet, one with the past and one with the flesh. And you could argue, if you wanted to wrap those together in a third section, you could argue that now he looks at the world as preoccupied with the flesh, and before in a better world, a world inhabited by ghosts as it turns out, but in a better world, people would not have stooped as low as his mother does now. To begin with that thing about the past, just to invoke another critic here, a very useful critic on this play is Emma Smith, and in her podcast and her book that introduces Shakespeare play by play, she talks about Hamlet as a play that has an absolute obsession with the past. In fact, she goes so far as to say that we don't have any other source of Hamlet, including the Danish one of 1200, Saxo Grammaticus, and including Belforet's book, Les Histoires Tragiques. We don't have any other source in which Hamlet's father is also called Hamlet. So Hamlet, our Hamlet, walks around as a kind of living witness to that glorious past, and it's a testimony that he finds really hard to sustain, I'd say. So first of all, how does Hamlet talk about the past? Here, he makes it very clear that the past is a lot worse than, the past is a lot better than the present. And he does it with a little slideshow, even better than mine. He shows Gertrude two pictures. Look here upon this picture and on this. By the way, as a rhetorical term, we can call this deixis, Greek for pointing out. And Hamlet is judging by appearances here. The counterfeit presentment of two brothers, it simply means that there are portraits. They're not the real things, but he's trying to bring them to life in front of Gertrude. And he compares them. You can almost see him doing it with this caesura here. Look upon this picture on the one half of the line and on this. We can be pretty clear that this is old H and this one is Claudius. It comes second. It's less good. Now, Hamlet, in making this comparison, draws on classical mythology and imagery. You'll remember he's done this before. He said that his father was like Hyperion compared to a satyr that was Claudius. A satyr, you remember, if you watched that video, is a kind of fat, bearded goat figure, half man, half goat, and therefore ridiculous, a kind of source of comedies and ridicule. Whereas his father was Hyperion, the sun god, the front of Jove himself, Jove, the king of the gods, Jupiter, as in Zeus. He's actually thrown in 4 gods to talk about his father, and they're all classical. The fact that they're classical too suggests that Hamlet looks not only to an old world, but to an old way of describing the world, and actually a pre-Christian world. Yes, those classical references reflect his education, as they do throughout the play, but they also, I would suggest, reflect a way of putting the past on a pedestal. A station like the herald Mercury, the goddess, the god of delivering messages, new lighted on a heaven-kissing hill, the idealised and idyllic settings in which he imagines his father romping around. Remember, his father was killed in an orchard, so there is something rather beautiful about the way he remembers his father. And indeed, Hamlet recognises that every god did seem to set his seal, to give the world assurance of a man. That it's almost as though all of the pagan heavens are invested in this creation. It is, yes, hyperbole. It's Hamlet almost taking the tropes of old school rhetoric and just finding something to apply them to, which is his late father. Look you now what follows. And what follows in time, in sequence of time, will always suggest to Hamlet that what is coming up is worse than what was before, as we've seen again. So you can link that with this idea as well, the kind of lapse, what falling off was there, as he said elsewhere. And look at how he describes what follows. Here is your husband like a mildewed ear. Now, ear there really means an ear of corn that's got mildew in it. So it's like he's comparing Claudius to a rotten piece of wheat. But it's the mildew that's blasting his wholesome brother. Now, that word ear, of course, does refer to an actual lug through which you can hear things and through which old Hamlet was poisoned. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the second part of our possible thesis, the physicality of his mother, before linking it to Hamlet's general sense of dis-ease and disease. But there is something else I want to talk about, and that is Hamlet's preoccupation with body parts. I'm pretty convinced that Hamlet wants to be a whole person and longs to be a whole person, but he recognizes that he isn't. And why I say that is because he, and he's not the only one to do this, but he quite often talks about body parts. He uses that figure of metonymy, that idea that you can represent someone by bits of them. Right at the very start, for example, when people said, is that Horatio? And he says, it's a piece of him. That Hamlet is a person who you can divide into, for example, the moment when Ophelia says about him, the scholars, courtiers, soldiers, eye, tongue, sword are all overthrown. That idea that you can represent the very different roles that Hamlet has by bits of them. Now he starts to see other people like this as well. And so that's why he perhaps does think of his father as an ear. And he does wonder if his mother has eyes. And he does talk about those eyes having to look towards a soul. And he splits his mother up into eyes and other senses. Have you eyes, he says. And then he goes on to say, sense, sure you have, else you'd have not the motion. You know, if you didn't have senses, you wouldn't have a kind of motivation, you wouldn't have stimulus response. Stimulus in this case being sexual desire for my uncle. But sure, that sense is apoplexed. You have senses in the sense of you have sense as in reason, but also sense as in physical sense. But that sense is apoplexed. It is made mad. It is incensed. It is all out of joint. And then, oh shame, where is thy blush? That even her cheeks are now called into being as part of her body. Look at how he splits up the physicality of his mother here. A physicality with which he's a bit obsessed, we begin to feel. What devil was it that has cozened you, has deceived you at hoodman blind? You know, why are you like a bird of prey that's had a hood put on it? Eyes without feeling, feeling without sight, ears without hands or eyes, smelling sans all. I'm suggesting here that Hamlet views his mother not as somebody with moral judgment or with sense in the sense, of reason, but with sense as in a kind of unthinking beast. After all, he's going to call the bed that she goes to sleep in with Claudius the nasty sty. This, by the way, as well, is very central to Hamlet's way of thinking. Hamlet, do you remember, he says things like, a beast that wants all reason wouldn't have done this. And he thinks that that human beings are given reason, and that we're not like beasts where it fusts in us unused. So he's judging his mother by the same high moral standard to which he would like to hold himself. He would like to be able to use reason in order to do the right thing. And here he wishes the same of his mother. He wishes that some actual sense, some actual logic, some actual self-control would step in and make the eyes act with feeling, to make feeling act with sight, to make what she hears govern what she does with her hands or her eyes or the rest of her body. It matters very much to him that his mother is in some kind of control. And there is the idea that the Queen should therefore be able to stop sleeping with his uncle, and he takes her to task for that. He carries on with this shaming of her by almost taking responsibility away from her. It's almost as though he begins to say, "Oh, so rebellious hell," or "Oh, vices," or other things like that, have taken control of her. "O rebellious hell, if thou canst mutine in a matron's bones." And here we have some sense, again, of that high standard to which Hamlet holds his mother, perhaps an unrealizable one. And he does hope and that his mother will reform. Because another way to see this whole scene is as Hamlet persuading his mother not only to do better and to stop sleeping with Claudius, but also to help him by covering up his pretense at madness, by making it seem as though he is really mad. Just to see that the Queen is picking up on Hamlet's references to body parts and kind of abstracting herself here. "Oh, Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turns my very eyes into my soul." And then Hamlet, again, the nasty sty, drawing attention to the fact that this kind of lovemaking is bestial. It's not just what beasts do, but he's actually making them like pigs. A severe contrast to the kind of roses and blushes that he thinks women should have. Other things to pick up on about the confrontation. These words are like daggers entering in my ears. You may remember that Hamlet has said that he will speak daggers unto her, but use none. So we can almost watch this scene thinking she is free from the threat of violence, bearing in mind he has just dispatched Polonius. Finally, he rounds off, and you can use this perhaps in the first part of any answer, he rounds off his assault on the corruption of the present by reminding us of just how tainted Claudius is. He is a murderer and a villain. This is the first time that the Queen has heard this. It's quite tempting to ask the question, how much does Gertrude know about her new husband's crimes? And Ian McEwan's book, Nutshell, explores the possibility that she knows really quite a lot. But really, there's absolutely nothing to go on. And the drama would rather depend on Gertrude realizing it in front of us, the audience. And just a last glance at that kind of rhetoric that Hamlet uses. "A slave that is not 20th part the kith of your precedent lord." Precedent meaning your previous one, the one who came before it. And again, this is Euras showing up that contrast between the old one, the precedent, and the vice of kings, and then laying into him. A 20th part of the kith, by the way, again, if you're arguing ever that Hamlet over-intellectualizes everything, is academic, is studious, is encumbered by the weight of his learning, this isn't the only time when he kind of uses maths to explain how declined and negligible the present is compared to the past. So we've actually got here that Claudius is, perhaps Polonius is better, but he's also only 5% the worth of old Hamlet. Speaking of which, old Hamlet will come in our next slide.